Hi, everyone. Welcome to our virtual book club. My name is Karen Sadi, and I'm a program manager at the Women Executive Network. We are very pleased and honored to have Cynthia Loyst here with us today, and I'm also very pleased to introduce her. A passionate advocate for healthy sexual information, Cynthia Loyst is best known for giving advice and opinions on the joys and complications of love. You probably recognize her as one of the co-hosts on CTV's daily talk show, The Social, which is in its 9th season. But what you may not know is that she's also the creator of findyourpleasure.com, a popular website dedicated to pleasure, sensuality, and pure, unadulterated joy. In January 2020, Loyst released her debut book, published by Simon & Schuster, called Find Your Pleasure, The Art of Living a More Joyful Life, which became a national bestseller. On top of that, she's also a WXN Top 100 Canada's Most Powerful Woman Award winner. And now, I would like to pass it on to Cynthia. Enjoy the session, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Karen, and thanks to the WXN. It's always such a pleasure working with you. And thank you to everyone who's here today for taking time out of your busy day. I know Zoom events have caused such a fatigue during this pandemic. So I'm extra honored that you showed up today. And I want to make this, because the theme is pleasure, as pleasurable as possible. So I really want you to feel safe and able to interact, pop a question out, even in the middle of when I'm talking about something. If there's something you're really interested in, or I didn't clarify, feel free to even pop up with your camera on if you feel comfortable. I would love to see your faces. All that to say, I also, while we still have time, and for those who are just entering in, if you have a couple of pieces of paper and a pen or a journal nearby that you can grab, I would love that, because at the end of this session, we're going to do some exercises in real time that I did during my book tour, and people really, really got a lot out of them. So feel free to run away right now for a short period of time and grab a piece of paper. If not, you can also just do these exercises in your head. So as Karen said, I'm a television host. Oh, by the way, I just came off shooting The Social. I shot from home. We're sort of partially at home and partially in the studio right now. And we did our Met Gala extravaganza. So I was sent these balloons to make it seem fancier. I'm not sure it does, but they brought me a lot of joy. So I left them up. It felt festive. So I hope this shot is making you feel fun. It's making me feel fun. Yeah, so I'm a television host. I was a producer before that. I'm also a sex educator with a certificate from the University of Michigan, and the creator of the online destination Find Your Pleasure, and a published author. And so today I am going to chat about my book, Find Your Pleasure, which I've described as sort of a cookbook with recipes for life. So I'm going to read some bits and pieces out of this. And I mean, it's interesting. I launched this right at the beginning of the pandemic. So it was January 2020, January 6th to be exact. And it's interesting to look back and think about that time, because as you all remember, it was just this sort of like small shadow way in the distance. I remember driving to work every day and hearing reports on the news about this strange virus out of Wuhan. And it just seemed like, I thought, oh, well, if this is coming up every day, is this something I should be paying attention? Is this going to impact my life? No. And, by the time I'd finished my book tour, and the last location was in Edmonton, we'd gone from the beginning of my tour, where I was literally hugging people who were coming up and talking to me about pleasure and joy and vulnerability and ambition and all the things that the book tackles, to the end where we felt, I felt very, very much like I had to keep a distance. And here we are now, almost a year and a half or 2 years into this. So it's striking. But I think one of the things that has become perfectly clear, I think, to all of us during this pandemic is that life can change on a dime. And I think a lot of people have realized that if you're not living your life joyfully and you're not living it pleasure filled, what are you living for? And so I do think one of the gifts, obviously there's been tons of devastation to do with this pandemic, but one of the gifts certainly has been that ability to slow down and really take stock of what's important. Because I know, I'm going to guess that there's a lot of very ambitious people who are watching right now. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later on, but ambition can be a huge pleasure killer. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be ambitious, I am. but it's really extra important for those of you who have a huge amount of drive and busyness and family lives as well, to take stock of those inner truths that tend to pop up when we are quiet. Because I think this, again, the pandemic caused a lot of stuff to burble to the surface. So I just, just because I can't see you, I wonder if anybody wants to pop up. Like, is there something that you discovered during this pandemic, an old pleasure, something small? A lot of people talked about nature and the impact of nature that it had on them during this pandemic. Just feel free to pop it in there. I would love to see it, or pop yourself up. If there's anything, like for me, I felt, I'll just share a quick story before we dive into the book. My son at the beginning of the pandemic, he's 8 years old, and my partner is Jason, who I talk about a lot on the show. And he started to develop a real anxiety during the pandemic. And I'm sure a lot of parents, people are saying more time with family. And someone got a new vibrator. Thank you for sharing that. We will get into sex stuff too. I hope we're all going to be very close and intimate by the end of this. My son was very depressed at the beginning of this. Obviously, it was like his life had been ripped up from under him, and there were some very concerning signs. But we started going out and being in nature, and man, nature is healing. And I talk about that a lot in my book. So a lot of people ask me what prompted me to explore the idea of pleasure in the first place. And I have a really long answer to this, but I'll give you sort of the shorter one. It was, in 2013, I gave birth to my son. Again, this is like 8 years ago now. And I actually auditioned for the show when I was very pregnant. And I didn't think I would get it because the show was timed to launch right at the time I'd just given birth. Luckily, it was about maybe 8 weeks in, they started doing prep. But still, any of you who have children know that those are some overwhelming, especially as first-time parents, and exhausting times. And as much as I was very excited about the show, and I was very thankful because I had this, great supportive partner and this healthy child, I was also breastfeeding. I was sleep deprived. I was drowning in things like, oh, I got to respond to those, thank you cards. So I was drowning in to-do lists. My house was a mess. I just felt like I was failing on all fronts as a woman. And it all came to a head, and this is a story that I share in the book, that I felt this kind of overwhelming sense of, it wasn't unhappiness, it wasn't postpartum, it was this general malaise, this general feeling of just also that something was not right and something was missing in my life. And it came to a head this one day live on the show, where I basically almost passed out live on the air, and it scared the heck out of me. I had an anxiety attack, basically. You wouldn't have known this, but I knew. I was sweating. I thought I was going to pass out. I think I literally couldn't string a sentence together. And I hope to never see this tape again from this day. But it was a real wake-up call for me. So I drove home in tears that day, and I didn't talk about it. But what dawned on me was that I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something just for me. And I decided to reach out to a bunch of my female friends who are also very busy with their careers and their home lives. And I asked them this question in an email: when was the last time you did something, purely for your pleasure? And I'm not talking about just a day at the spa, which there's nothing wrong with that, but I just meant something that was really, really meaningful to them. And, most of them responded, I can't remember, way before I had children. And one woman just wrote back, ha, ha. And I thought, okay, there's something here. There's something about this time of our lives, and maybe for even longer, and I'll get to that a bit later on, where we lose sight of things that bring us joy. And why do we do that? And especially juxtaposed with when I was watching my son and realizing how easy it was for kids to find joy and pleasure in just about everything. I thought, what happens here? Where is this disconnect? And so I started to do a deep dive on pleasure as a concept, which led to the website and eventually a book. Writing was a big pleasure of mine as a child that I'd lost sight of. So this really was an exercise in me finding joy. I also began dancing and eating in different ways. It was really about trying to get into my senses and back into my body in a different way without feeling like my body was a function. But this idea was a bit terrifying to me, this project. It was adding more to my plate, even though I felt like it was actually something that was going to fill me up as opposed to deplete me. So speaking of fears, because I did have a lot of fear around that, I'm going to read you a piece about fear from the book. Let me just for a moment, the book is filled with different sections and lots of photographs from my personal life, and also different sections. There's ones about love, there's ones about the home, parenting, creativity, and so on. But this piece I'm going to read to you is about facing fears. And I feel like all the people who are listening right now have probably gone through periods where they've had to tackle their fears. And so this is the photograph that I put with it. So I'm an anxious person. Whenever I'm faced with a new scenario, I tend to get panicky. I've also had several full-blown anxiety attacks. But if there's one thing I've learned, and I learned it a long time ago, is that I have to face my fears in order to get the most pleasure out of life. When I was around 10 years old, I went to a magic show, and the magician asked the audience for volunteers. My hand immediately shot up, and he asked me to join him on the stage. But suddenly my stomach did a flip-flop, and I shook my head. And I decided it was better to stay with my family rather than risk facing, I don't know, embarrassment, shame, abject terror. The charming magician moved on from me and chose a little blonde girl. At the end of the trick, he gave her this amazing teddy bear, and I was devastated. I didn't recognize it then, but it was a really good lesson on how succumbing to fear can kill joy and opportunity. Fear of being hurt can hold you back from love. Concerns about safety can keep you from seeing the world. Fear of being seen as bossy can mean you get passed over for leadership positions. You can also get simply stuck doing what feels comfortable, but you never know where you could end up if your ship never leaves the port. So how do you get over fears to discover what the pleasures that await? When you're having negative thoughts, I like to call that awfulizing. Try replacing those thoughts with more realistic ones. Notice I didn't say positive thoughts. Let's face it, not every situation in life can be spun into gold. But this can help prevent you from going down a negativity spiral. For example, I would always call Jason, my partner, before I would do a dance performance and say, I don't know why I do this. I hate this feeling. And he would say that nervous energy is just misplaced excitement. And after the nerves, anxiousness, and fear, sweetness comes on the other side. The pleasure of knowing that you overcame those feelings, shared your voice or talents with others, and faced a challenge head on. So instead of being an audience member to your life, choose to be on stage and live life fully. So, yeah, I used to be a belly dancer. Sorry, that was, and I literally would call him and go, why do I do this? I hate this feeling of nervousness, but he just had different lens. And I use that actually with my son all the time now, as I'm sure parents have as well. So here's a question. When I say the word pleasure, what things come to mind? Feel free, put it in the chat. What are the things that automatically come to mind when I say pleasure? I know because I tried to secure my URL and had some problems. That's one of the things that comes to mind. Okay, well, things I loved as a child. I love that, Lauren. So good. I'm glad you chose that because so some of the things that come to mind when you Google the word pleasure is, yeah, Lauren says, when I didn't have to impress anyone, just me. Exactly. When you weren't looking around and thinking of other people. Virginia says time for that's just for me, that I don't have to share with anyone. I think that's what the rest of that said. Yeah, I mean, pleasure as a word, as a concept, a lot of people think of it as something that's like a kind of dangerous. A lot of people associate it with automatically with sex and think of sexual pleasure. And it's not to say that that's not important, but it's certainly not what I'm only referring to when I talk about it. Letting my freak flags fly proudly, yes. I think there's this idea, certainly that I came across when I started doing research on pleasure, that it was like the kind of dirty cousin to happiness. That happiness was this thing that was like something to reach for, but pleasures were like a slippery slope to ruin. And it's not to say that I don't think that there are certain pleasures that if overindulged in, if compulsively attached to, can't cause problems. That is for sure true. But I think the problem is people just thinking that all pleasure and joy is inevitably dangerous or that they are superficial has actually done a huge disservice in particular to women. I define pleasure as engaging in the senses. It actually means just a sense of happy satisfaction and enjoyment. Like, I think this is an important nuanced discussion because I actually think claiming pleasure in your life is a feminist act. and is a radical act, because we grow up, I think, being told, yeah, exactly. Lauren brings this up, the guilty pleasures. Think about how many of us are taught that there's an idea that we should be embarrassed or ashamed of certain pleasures. Why do we feel guilty about pleasure? Well, Lauren, this is a good question. I think we do because most of us have been raised, many of us have been raised, I was raised in a religious background. Maybe it might be part of your cultural background, but even absent of those, there are constant messages telling women in particular that you are either not enough or too much. And I can remember, and I always tell the story with the caveat of my mother is a lovely person, but I was probably around 12 years old. And I remember literally getting caught with my hand in the cookie jar. And my mother was like, "What are you doing?" And then she said, "Don't come crying to me when you get fat." And of course, like, that's a terrible thing to say. Don't say that ever to anybody. But the messaging was based in fear, and it was based in stuff that she hadn't unpacked about her childhood. And there was this idea that I and I think many women got taught, which is that if, you better not be too big, otherwise, too indulged, you'll be sort of unlovable. That was the subtext. Of course, we know this is not true. And the same thing goes with like asking for what you want in the bedroom. You might be seen as that kind of girl, right? You can't be too enjoying of your food. You can't be too enjoying of your sex life. You can't be too enjoying of your voice. Again, like, that's another way in which we kind of quell women down. It's like, if you'll be seen as bossy if you're too assertive. So there are all these ways, and all those things, food, sex, following your passion vocally, those are all huge sources of pleasure that we are constantly taught, bury, tamp down. And I think that this distorts our experience of life and starts to set us on this path where we follow certain scripts, where we can sometimes find ourselves following other people's idea of what success looks like, or other people's ideas of what happiness looks like. Darby, your message is cut off, but it looks like pleasure is something you find special. I missed part of that, but thank you for that. I'm going to read a piece about slowing down, because here's the thing: in the busyness of life, you cannot often hear what is trying to talk to you. So I wrote a piece called "In Praise of Slow." Do less. It was a message a friend of mine put on her social media, and it stood out because it was so counter to all the other messages I was seeing. We live in a fast food world. We celebrate multitaskers who always rush around. Yet our world of faster and more creates habits that are neither good for our planet nor lend themselves to pleasure. This simple instruction to do less reminded me of a time when I traveled to a sleepy town in Spain and ordered a café con leche to go. The barista simply looked at me and asked, "Okay?" Then gave me my coffee in a porcelain mug. At first, I was slightly miffed, but as I sat in a rickety chair in that old building and started to take in the sights and the smells and the sounds around me, I realized I would have missed all that if I just walked off with my coffee. And that planted a seed in my heart, a tiny radical way to embrace pleasure. Start getting things to stay. Sit and sip your coffee. Eat your meal slowly. Relish your wine. Savor that dessert. Then apply this idea of slow to other parts of your life. Try slow parenting. How about slow sex? When you start to slow down, when you embrace doing less, that's when the real pleasures of life start to reveal themselves. So again, for me, it was such a joy to just kind of start thinking about life through a different lens and start thinking through my senses. But one of the questions that people often ask me is, were there any surprising things that you discovered while you were researching the book? Because some of the pieces are more journal entries and some are actually more research-based. And I think it was this idea that I always intuitively knew that pleasure isn't this kind of automatic, like, danger. Because I did get that message of like, if it feels good, probably don't do it. There are actually, but nobody talks about this, there are actually huge and maybe surprising health benefits to pleasure. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Did you know that there was a study done that showed that patients who are in hospital beds in the hospital will recover faster if they have a beautiful view outside their window, or they look at pictures of loved ones regularly. So there's something about this connection between our what we can see, what we can remember, what we can sort of be viscerally experiencing and the way it impacts our physical health. I mean, I think we know this again intuitively. Another one was the impact of touch. And I mean, I have a piece about that I might read later on, but you know, there's all these little ways in which, and I think about this a lot now since we are in this epidemic of anger and how starved for touch so many of us are, particularly during this pandemic. To me, there's no surprise. Those are two things that are very connected. There's research that shows that there was a person who went down the street and accidentally would touch different strangers, and those strangers were automatically nicer to the people who interacted with them. And again, I'm not talking about creepy touch or non-consensual, like weirdo touch in an inappropriate way. I'm talking about just even a waitress touching someone as they exchange money. And again, this is something that now has become quite fraught in COVID times. But our bodies, we know that babies won't grow without touch. There's something extraordinarily profound about the action of connecting physically with another person, even non-sexually. There's also been, we know this, that there's been a huge epidemic with opioids, particularly in the United States, although here as well. And there's a small town, I think it's in Pennsylvania, that has been taking artisans and getting them to work with people who are struggling to overcome their addictions and getting them to make something with their hands, like a guitar, like, making crafts basically. And it activates the same pleasure centers in the brain as the opioids do. So there's just some really profound things that it's like our bodies were built for pleasure, and pleasure is meant to fuel us in a particular way. It's just obviously going to matter which pleasures you choose matter. Breastfeeding is another one that I certainly didn't know. And this is, of course, not true for everyone, but built into it is this rush of oxytocin, which is like a cuddle hormone, which is a feel-good hormone. So, and of course, sex, like orgasm, gives a similar post bliss out chemistry that overwhelms us. So I do think we are primed for pleasure, and we need to seek out more of it as opposed to less of the right kinds of it, of course. And then, someone mentioned earlier on this idea of guilty pleasure, that there's such a, I want to eliminate that from our candor completely, from our, we should never think about that again. Stop feeling guilty about your pleasures, embrace them. I love Barry Manilow. I'm going to tell it from the rooftops. I think he's amazing, and I don't care who knows it. I'm going to read a piece about, the pleasure of touch, if we're up for that. Start thinking about your questions as well. Someone else loves Barry Manilow. Oh gosh. Okay, the pleasure of touch. This is a picture of myself and Jason. That's from our wedding, actually. Truth be told, though, this looks like a very tender picture, and we had just gotten into kind of almost a fight right before we were going to do our dance in front of everyone, and I was stressed out. Stress is a pleasure killer as well. Okay, I'm in a room, lying on a bed, completely naked, covered only with a thin sheet. I'm not alone. A fully clothed stranger is giving me a rub down. I have paid this stranger quite a sum of money to cover me in fancy oils and warming lotions, basically to give me pleasure. This isn't a sexual exchange, but a therapeutic one. Do you ever wonder why we pay virtual strangers to massage our naked bodies? It's because we crave touch. Touch is arguably one of the most important and yet overlooked senses. Every second of every day, we receive tactile information about the world around us. Check in with your own touch sensations right now. Are you holding a book? A tablet? What does it feel like? Is it soft or hard? Cool or warm? What about where you're sitting? Does it feel cozy or rigid? You're touching all kinds of things, although you probably weren't even thinking of those sensations until you purposely tuned into them. Of course, we also touch other people. Think of the last person you touched. Was it a firm handshake? Oh gosh, with a colleague? A warm hug with a friend? A knee-melting kiss from a lover? How long ago was it? If you can't remember, you're probably suffering from a touch deficit. We need touch to survive. Every person who's had a child recently knows one of the first things they tell you in the hospital is the importance of skin-to-skin contact. Even if babies are given all the milk in the world, they simply won't thrive without the magical power of touch. In our world where people are more likely to be connecting through screens instead of sensations, never forget that we humans need to touch and be touched in the right kinds of ways in order to get the most pleasure out of life. So the book is also filled with what I like to call like pleasure prompts, or little kind of like ideas for you to kind of work on. So in this one, and you can do this if your camera's off, or you can do it with your camera's on. I wrote pleasure prompt: touch yourself, rub your eyes, scratch your back, tickle your arms. Now keep going. Let pleasure be your guide. I think we need more permission to give ourselves pleasure. Many people feel like it's okay to schedule, you know, day to clean the house, or like, you know, for sure, many people decide to work in exercise as part of their daily routine. And we really don't think about having, you know, an unscheduled day or an hour built into our schedule to just play or explore, or touch. These are things that we would think of as being superfluous, and I'm here to say that they are actually integral. Because of what I was saying before about it being sort of radical, and those messages that we get. So do we want to talk about sex? Does anyone have any thoughts about that, or is that, I mean, I'm willing to avoid talking about sex, but if people feel that they want to, I'll just say this. One of the things that I wrote about in the book, and one of the things that's really important to me as a sex educator, is keeping an open mind. I think too often we think very superficially about sexuality, and ways that often prioritize straight relationships, and in particular often heterosexual men. There's this huge orgasm gap between men and women. There's also this constant idea of like, oh, am I doing it enough, or am I doing it right? And I write an advice column, and a lot of people are always asking me, am I normal, or is this right? And I just think I would love if I can leave you with one thing when it comes to pleasure in your intimate personal life, is that you are a unique being, and there is no one way for your sexual life. I think it's as individualized as your fingerprint. And don't let anyone tell you any different. A sexual identity in life can be as quiet and you know, predictable as the outfits you choose every day, perhaps, or it can be as wild and crazy, as long as it is authentic to you and your partner, or authentic to you and yourself. But I do think, I find it tragic that there aren't enough messaging out there for young women to just make sure that they have an autonomy around their body, and they have an understanding of their body, and they aren't just looking to someone else to give them permission to explore their bodies. So anyway, I write a lot about partners and, you know, relationships and love as well in the book. And the one thing that did come up a lot on my book tour is that, you know, women would say, oh, I put off connecting because, you know, I can't even think straight until my house is clean, until the dishes are done, or until the bed is made. And then that's fine. Like I do think there's an interconnectedness of feeling calm in your mind, calm in your home. I mean, I as I look around, this room is chaos. Like I've got really weird things, because it's just kind of like become the thing where everything is thrown. And I've accepted that, because I think I will just put this out there, that sometimes we have to tell ourselves different scripts. Like, what if the script you told yourself instead of, I have to clean before I can even think about getting intimate with my partner? What if it's that I have to feel safe with my partner, or connected and happy with my partner, before I can be intimate? That makes sense. Or what if it's that I can prioritize my own pleasure before I decide to tackle all of that? These are just like, you know, things, food for thought. You can tell yourself a different story if you want to. I'm going to talk a little bit about mindfulness, because it's a real buzzword these days. And I will say that particularly during this I wrote about it in the book. And even when I was talking about it after I wrote the book, I was a little bit ambivalent about mindfulness. Because I thought to myself, I'm never going to be that person who is like washing the dishes and just being like, oh, the feel of the water is so nice. Like I do distract myself. And I think that's okay. But what I will say for mindfulness, which is the act of really trying to be more present in your senses and be fully in your body in moments, as opposed to distracting yourself, and that allows you to be more present with the people that you're with. I think it does make us calmer. And if you are not already, there are a number of great mindful meditation courses out there. The one I do regularly is called 10% Happier, and it's by Dan Harris, who I feel like is a kindred spirit because he also had a panic attack live on the air. He's an ABC news reporter. Anyway, what I've learned from doing my mindfulness practice, which is like 5 minutes to 15 minutes a day of just sitting, breathing, and listening to a guided sort of meditation, is how to go back to that space when I'm feeling stressed out. And that is the biggest gift that it gives you, is you learn, your brain learns how to have a safe spot to go back to when you're feeling, maybe you have to do a really powerful presentation and you're stressed out about it, or you have to have a really uncomfortable conversation with a colleague. The art of learning how to calm yourself down and be mindful is a gift that keeps on giving. I will say that. But one of the flip side that I don't think is talked about enough is mindlessness and the pleasures that come along with escapism. And I think this is equally as important in the bedroom as it is in the boardroom. What I mean by that is tapping into fantasy, tapping into maybe previous experiences that you can draw upon. So if I'm talking about in the bedroom, it would be draw upon for, desire purposes. But if I'm talking about in the boardroom, maybe you can draw upon personal experiences that prove, if you're worried about giving a presentation, what other hard things have you done in the past? I'm always amazed when women who've given birth talk to me about fears that they have, like about giving a public presentation, for example. You gave birth. You've done really hard things before. Remember those things, and those things will give you strength. So not only that, in terms of pleasure, the power of nostalgia, remembering that bittersweet feeling of going back. And I used to do this during early on the pandemic too. I would lie in bed at the end of the day, and I would travel through my my grandparents' home in my mind, or I would recreate in like vivid detail what it was like to go on a particular vacation. And the joy it brought me was if I could conjure up that in enough vivid detail, it felt like I was right there. So that's an incredible source of pleasure as well. Just be cognizant of the time. Does anyone have a question right now? Does anyone have a comment? I'm just going to flip something on my camera. Just hold on for 1 second. Oh, hold on, guys. Hold on. I did something. My screen is, I'm coming back. Oh gosh. Did I do it? Did I manage it?
Yeah, you're back.
We're good. Sorry
back.
about that. This is the thing. I'm set up for work, and it's backwards, my camera, and it's far away. And there was anyway, no need to explain. One of the things that I do want to talk about, if there are no questions right now, is something a pleasure that I discovered through the Women's Executive Network, which is the pleasure of mentoring. I had the privilege and honor of mentoring an amazing person through the Women's Executive Network, and it has brought me, I can't even tell you, so much joy. She works in a totally different line of work than me, but getting to know her and feeling like I was able to help her in some ways, coach her through some challenging situations, and her trying to take her whole life to a different level and really use her voice was really powerful. So I'm going to read you a piece that I wrote about mentoring even before I mentored. This is the photo. I don't know why we chose that photo beside there, but it seems very serene. Pleasure of mentoring. Former U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright once said, "There's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women." I'm not sure we can say that's an absolute truth, but I do think there's something important about supporting other women. When I was starting out in television, there were women I would have loved to get guidance from, but at best, I found them distant and intimidating. At worst, mean and ostracizing. I don't totally blame them though. For a long time, it felt like women in this industry were playing an awful game of musical chairs, Once you got one of the coveted seats at the table, you sure as hell weren't going to give one up. Thankfully, as women have fought for and won more seats, there's more mentoring, which is infinitely more pleasurable for everyone. I've been lucky since then to have those who saw something in me that I didn't even necessarily see in myself, and who pushed me and nurtured me. In turn, I've had the opportunity to share my experiences with younger people and have found there's a real sense of accomplishment when I witness their successes. Reverse mentoring is also becoming popular as businesses acknowledge that younger people climbing the corporate ladder have things to teach those who've been around, longer. Their fresh, unencumbered way of thinking means they often come up with very imaginative ideas. When you help others, something magical happens and we expand our humanity. So I will admit that there was something really striking while I was doing my book tour that happened, which was a few women in different cities at the end of it came up to me and said, I've spent my entire life looking after my partner, my husband, my kids, and I have not a clue what brings me pleasure. And they often said this with tears in their eyes. And I do not think that's an uncommon story. And this goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning. And what brings me pleasure isn't going to be necessarily what brings you pleasure, and only you can try to figure this out. That's why I give a lot of guidance in the book about ways in which you can find clues, the power of journaling to get to those things, the power of artist states, because I do believe everyone has an inner artist inside of them. We know that kids are all happy to show their artistic side. We all have that inside of us. And I just think, I do think we need to think more about that, because you don't want to get to the end of your life and go, who am I? And Lauren says we need to learn how to connect or reconnect. These things are getting cut off a bit, but yes, with ourselves, for sure. And I do think there's a kind of misery that goes on. You can see people who've sort of just been climbing the corporate ladder in one direction, and maybe that's not even, they just kept, like, sometimes the scariest thing is when doors just keep opening up and you never stop to go, is this actually what I want? So the people who ask me, you know, where do I begin to ask these questions, these deep, hard questions? So I wrote a piece in here, and this is something, and then I want to get to a couple of exercises before we get to questions. I think that's good timing, maybe. Karen, do you think?
Oh yeah, we have lots of time. It's
okay, good.
We're ending at 4, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we still have like half an hour of you for the activity, and
oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So here's something for you to all think about right now. So this is at the beginning of my book. So I wrote about the keys to pleasure. So I'm often asked, how can I get more pleasure out of my life right now? Here's my answer. Just say, ah. Well, there's no doubt that taking in a deep breath and sighing ah will automatically make you feel better. Ah is actually an acronym to remind you of the 4 keys to pleasure: awareness plus attention plus authenticity plus help equals pleasure. This simple formula can help you start building a life of pleasure today. So let's start with it. Awareness. What gives someone else deep pleasure may not do a thing for you. So become aware of what you truly love. Are there things you used to do that have fallen to the wayside? Is there something you've always wanted to try? If you had a free day to yourself, what would you choose to do? If money weren't an issue, what work would you do? These questions are just a start, but they'll get you thinking about where your passion lies. And where there's passion, there's pleasure. 2, attention. Life can get really busy, and sometimes we forget to pay attention to moments of joy. But part of experiencing a life of pleasure is being mindful of the incredible delights your senses have to offer. You can also find pleasure by directing your attention away from the present moment and mindfully tuning into your fantasies, which helps you envision new realities, stokes your imagination, or just provides a well-needed mental escape. The key to both mindfulness and escapism is the power of the mind. 3, authenticity. Sometimes it's hard to find pleasure because we're not living in a way that's truthful for us. Sometimes we're in denial of what we actually want for our lives, or how, sorry, this is my eyesight. Does anyone else feel like their eyesight's gotten worse during the pandemic? Sometimes we're in denial about what we actually want for our lives, or how we are getting in our own way, or maybe even contributing to our own problems. Maybe you're struggling with a physical or emotional issue, or maybe something or someone in your life is a problem masquerading as a pleasure. Ooh, we'll talk about that in a second. This is where authenticity and honesty come in. Ask yourself, who am I? What am I seeking and why? Is this a pleasure that I control, or does this pleasure control me? It's not always easy to answer these questions, but when you do, you'll find that acknowledging and embracing what you truly find pleasurable is liberating. And the last point, H, is for help. Everyone struggles at some point under the weight of to-do lists at home and work. If you find yourself in this situation, ask for help. Even if it's something small, carving out time for yourself, even 5 minutes, is important because it sets the stage for pleasure to happen. And the more you create these moments, the more pleasure you will receive. The next time you start to wonder how to bring more pleasure in your life, remember these 4 keys and you'll be well on your way. I did get asked when I was in Toronto by a woman if pleasure or seeking pleasure was a privilege. And she actually had a really powerful story. She was an immigrant mother working 2 jobs, and she had family members, extended family members living in her house. And she's like, I can't even imagine, how to make space and time for pleasure. And my belief still is that it shouldn't be a privilege. And in her case in particular, I was curious about why other members of the family weren't stepping up to help her out. If you're living with, several generations of family, why are there not more people who are, let's say, taking care of the food or taking care of the cleaning or taking care of the kids at some point, so that she can at least even take 10 minutes a day to just be away, do something else. But sometimes, and this goes back to the scripts, there are things that we get in our own way of because we don't want anybody else. No one else can, my husband, he can't take care of the kids' lunches. No, he doesn't do them right. Or no. You can't fold the towels that way. No. That's just a random example, but those are ways in which we I think hijack our own pleasure because we're trying to, control. Rhonda, I want to hear what you have to. It's important to remember the seasons of our lives. I think this might have been the rest of that. But
yeah,
yes.
Sorry, I can read the rest for you. So it says, sometimes we have time for more pleasure. Sometimes we can only spare 5 minutes. It balances out.
Yes, exactly. And this is the same thing. I'll go back to our relationships. I think people don't talk enough, especially in long-term relationships, about the ebb and flow of intimate connection, that's inevitable because of a million and one factors that happen in life. But also, as with friendships, when we think about, let's say I'm having a friend over, maybe in non-COVID times, but even now in a barbecue outside, whatever, I will think about my friend coming over. I will think about what I might cook. I might get excited. I might plan a recipe for my friend who's coming over. I might choose a wine. I will think about, maybe it's depending on the type of friendship, I might think about playing a game. We think about these types of things. And yet with our partners, our long-term partners, those ideas can often fall by the wayside. So for example, when I ever suggest like scheduling sex, and I don't mean intercourse when I say sex, I mean like, the buffet of options of physically connecting if you want to. People are like, oh, it's so unromantic to schedule it. But we pour ourselves into our friendships and plan out things all the time. So why not plan out this thing that doesn't have to mean one thing? It can mean a whole bunch of things. And if you don't, if you expand that idea about the things that bring you pleasure, maybe it's just that partner is going to give you a massage. Maybe that's it. But I think we take for granted that things always have to unfold in one particular way, and that somehow it's unromantic to schedule things. But I challenge that notion as well. Speaking of bodies, I would love somebody to read Donna's comment because I can only see part of it.
Yeah, it says, as women, we are somewhat conditioned to feel guilty if we do things for ourselves. As mothers and wives, we are somewhat expected to put everyone first. And if we do something we want, we feel selfish.
100%. Again, who does it serve to have that kind of messaging in our lives? I mean, this is where people talk about the patriarchy, right? Like this is it, to embed a messaging that it is selfish for women to take time out for themselves. Men don't get that same message. At least most men don't. And I've had to learn that from my partner as well. Like occasionally early on, and this might resonate with some people, when we had our son, he would just take a nap. Just we wouldn't announce. He would just kind of take a nap, and I would be so receiving. I was like, wow. And then I started to do it. I just took a nap. Like I just would go upstairs, and I think I maybe sometimes announced it because I wanted them to be quiet, but it was liberating. It was like, oh, I can actually just take this. And a good partner will also be very supportive of that. So, this idea that it is selfish to carve out time for yourself, I mean, it upholds a kind of, it upholds this idea that women have to be the perfect everything to everyone at all times. And that is a load of crap that does a huge disservice to women emotionally, physically. I could go on and on. So claim your pleasure. I want to go back to bodies, because I also think this is something that's important for women to talk about. And I got to find it. Just hold on. Oh, 117. I think this is it. Well, I don't know where the one is. I did write about also the way in which we are very hard on our bodies, but this is a slightly different one. And it's called Body Messages. So I think women have a lot of chronic pain. Women have a lot of also unexplained pain caused from combination of lifestyle, food, stress, all kinds of numbers of reasons. And I think part of this is also because we are not given permission to take pleasure and take time out for our own pleasures. So here's what I wrote. At one point, my back simply gave up. It had been giving me warnings, a little discomfort here, a little pain there, but I kept picking up my increasingly heavy toddler and wearing bad shoes, was too busy to go to Pilates class to strengthen my core or even to find the time to stretch. So what did my back do? It took me down. Our bodies are wise. They hold stories locked up behind hidden doors deep within us. Sometimes those stories try to break free. At first, they just knock, maybe ring a soft bell. But eventually, if they aren't listened to like little children, they burst through the barriers we've built and they demand our attention. Arianna Huffington knows this firsthand. She was once so tired at work that she passed out, hitting her face on her desk so hard she required stitches. It was literally a wake-up call for her. She was burning out and her life needed a change. She began to scale back on the amount of work she was doing. She instituted a nap policy at work and then even stepped down from her role at the Huffington Post to focus on her wellness brand. Our bodies have so many ways of communicating with us. Besides emotional breakdowns or burnout, there are things like irritable bowel syndrome, itchy skin rashes, or chest pains caused by acute stress. I'm not saying that all pain is some kind of manifestation of emotional issues. Sometimes shit just happens, but I think that we would all do well to listen to the aches, pains, and emotions in our bodies and recognize that if we're numbing, dulling, or trying to ignore them, we shouldn't be doing that. Whether you are really sick or in pain or just tired, one of the messages your body is sending is to slow down. When my back gave up, I panicked at first thinking there's so much that has to get done. But even then, somehow the important stuff got done. And the rest, it turned out, simply wasn't that important. So then I have a pleasure project at the end of this that I actually would love if we can do together right now. I was going to save this to the end, but I feel like it's written right there, so it's meant to go right now. So if you have a pen and paper, I want you to write down just quickly, and I'll give a couple minutes for this. And I hope some of you will share this. And we had a great time people sharing in my book tour. So write down everything you feel like you have to do in a day. Just jot it down quickly. And then on the other side, don't think too much about this. I want you to just afterwards strike out what you can ignore and then write down what you can delegate. Put a D beside what you could delegate. Okay? I'm going to give you a minute. Okay, that's a minute. I hope you guys didn't overthink that. Does anyone want to share just kind of a general, did you discover anything that you can put aside in a day or something that you can delegate? Does anyone want to share that thing? It's okay. Oh, okay, Bridget, nearly all out. When you live alone, it's more about, I'm sorry, I'm losing these.
Yeah, that's okay. I just said like nearly everything that I listed could be done by someone else in my house other than my actual job.
Yep. There you go, right?
And then Lauren said, when you live alone, it's more about prioritizing.
Yeah. Yes. I think that that's very true. I have another exercise, and I would love for people to just do this, whoever wants to, because, again, studies show that there's something really cathartic about the act of journaling, and writing things down on paper can be very, to release things and putting your feelings and thoughts. I actually even have a short story of an anecdote that, I believe that Juliet loves journaling too. Yeah, it's so great. I believe that major changes in my life, or when I've had a pleasure, sort of a pain masquerading as a pleasure, it comes out through journaling. So, quick story. This is years ago in my 20s, I was a heavy smoker. So that was I had convinced myself that was a pleasure. I fancied myself like a, rebel girl smoking, whatever. But it was a real monkey on my back, and it was impacting my life, obviously, physically, and just, it's disgusting. And it was a very repetitive and soul sucking habit, but I wasn't ready to quit, or so I thought. But I started journaling, and stream of consciousness. I don't know if anyone else has read the book by Julia Cameron called The Artist's Way. I highly recommend it. But she recommends you wake up in the morning and you write stream of consciousness for just 3 pages without even thinking. And you're not allowed to look back until a certain point. Like, I think it's like 6 weeks in, you look back. And then your truths really come out, because mine was my waking thought every morning that I quickly forgot as my day unfolded was, oh my God, I feel disgusting. I got to quit smoking. And it was a huge wake up call for me to read. All that to say, I would love for you to really quickly, again, jot down the following prompts. I know it's hard because so start with this. I'll do them one by one. Okay. Write down, I love, and then put something. First thing that comes to mind. Could be a person, can be a thing, can be a food. How about this? First thing that comes to mind after I say, I feel. How are you feeling right now? Do you feel hungry, sad, tired? Write down the word. I know. Write something you know about yourself. You're a good mom. You have great friends. You deserve to feel pleasure. Whatever comes to mind. I know. I wish. What do you wish for? Do you want your partner to clean more? Do you want your kids to help out more? You could quit your job. And then last, I plan. What do you plan for? What are you making space for? To ask for more help? To spend more time with your kids? To prioritize your pleasure? Okay, I'm not going to ask you to read that. But I would like to have you do this. I mean, this is always a bit dark, but it doesn't have to be. Some people really believe in order to fully enjoy life, we have to think more about death. And obviously, death has been a huge shadow, sometimes certainly more profoundly than others during this pandemic. But it's something that's inevitable for all of us, and it's something that we should be thinking about more. So write down quickly, what are some things you'd like to be remembered for? What do you want people to say about you after you've gone? I'm going to give you 30 seconds. This sometimes can get very emotional. Lauren, you think a lot about the legacy you want to leave. I think it's so important. I do too. And get busy creating that. Yeah. I mean, does anyone want to share what they've written down, but how they want to be remembered? It's okay. Okay. Oh, somebody, did I hear somebody come and pop in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I put my hand up. I wasn't sure if I just start talking.
Start talking. I would love to hear from you. What's your name?
It's Lauren.
Hi, Lauren.
Hello. I've been the chatty one on the chat.
Yeah, but, I love it.
I'm a human rights lawyer, so I'm always thinking about legacy, because I think when you do this line of work, you're very concerned about, am I leaving the world a better place? And so I want to be remembered as somebody who made a difference, who was always fighting for right, and who did it with kindness and compassion. And so that's my thing. It's a tall order, and I feel like I'm always behind, but it also is what drives me forward every day.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's easy to get whipped up into daily stresses, you know, commutes and, you know, are my kids hitting milestones, or is there a problem with somebody at my work, and drama and gossip, and it can really quickly make us lose sight of our own personal values and the things that bring us joy in life, and that actually bring us meaning. And so if we have this statement, and some people like to even write their own obituaries that you can come back to and be like, am I still aligned with how I want to be remembered? It can be a very powerful thing to do. I want to read you one more piece, and then I think we should maybe go to questions soon. Because I feel like there's, I mean, I can keep going on and on, but I would love to hear more about.
Okay. If you want to, read the one more section, and then then we can go to Q&A.
Beautiful. And you guys can ask me anything. You can ask me about the book. You can ask me about the social. You can ask me about sex education. And if you don't feel comfortable popping up, then just email it. Okay, so this is lessons from cherry blossoms. For those of you who don't live in a four-season climate, cherry blossom trees represent one of the first signs that spring is officially on. What is extra special about them is that blooming season, while glorious, is very short-lived. After the delicate pink or white flowers open, they almost immediately begin to fall, looking like snow on the ground. In the city where I live, there's a park filled with hundreds of cherry blossom trees, so people come from far and wide to bask in their glory. I really hate crowds, and I also get anxious easily, but recently I decided to brave the bustle in order to honor these precious blossoms. I packed up my son along with some picnicky things and headed out. I drove across the city, found parking, and then trekked through the enormous park, only to discover that the blossoms weren't quite fully open yet. I'll admit, I thought to myself, maybe I would have been better off just admiring something at a garden center closer to home. But once we were all settled, I couldn't help but feel charmed. The park was packed with others who were all out for the same reason, to acknowledge and celebrate the beauty and magic of cherry blossoms. I quickly realized, though, that this time-honored tradition isn't really about the incredible beauty of the blossoms at all. What people are drawn to is the fact that these flowers are a reminder of the fragile impermanence of life. It's not surprising that they're hugely popular in Japan. They're a potent metaphor for Buddhist themes like mortality, mindfulness, and living in the present. You can't predict when anything will change. All you can do is try your best to celebrate little moments, as if they, like the cherry blossoms, might at any second blow away in the wind. So yeah, I mean, I hope, again, the book goes into like everything from home to parenting, to the arts, to relationships, and sort of touches on different points of pleasure through, you know, a wide lens with these little activities and prompts. So it's extraordinarily personal. I mean, I hope if you pick up a copy, please visit me on my website and let me know what you thought. And there's pieces on my website as well that are related. But I would love to field some of your questions, and it can be about career and it can be about pleasure, whatever. I'm here for you.
Okay, I'll let everyone, you can use the chat or if you wish to ask questions, but I do have some questions that came through during registration. So I'll go through some of those as well.
Perfect.
Okay. What was the biggest risk that you have taken in your professional life?
The biggest risk was me going from, so my career started out behind the scenes as a television producer. So I was quite shy, and I loved being behind the scenes as a producer and being in the editing bay and traveling with work. And then in 2008, after I'd spent a number of years working myself up the ladder, I was a manager by that point in time. I managed a crew that created documentaries, and I loved it. But 2008 happened, and you know, the economy shifted, and all of a sudden we were losing tons of jobs. I had to fire a bunch of staff, and I was aware that my job was in jeopardy. I could just feel it. And so there was an executive at that time who thought I should try doing on-air work. And I was like, no, not interested. And he mentioned it a bunch of times. And then it wasn't until I had to let go staff members that I was like, I got to pivot. I kind of hate that word right now because it comes up a lot, but I knew I had to pivot and go out of my comfort zone. And so my partner is a director of photography. And so I started working with him, and I started taking improv classes and trying to get comfortable, because to say that I was terrified of public speaking is an understatement. And so this goes back to that idea of confronting fears. And this was a huge fear. And I was thrown in the deep end because I pitched a show to this executive. I said I could host and produce a show. And it turns out it was a nightly show on CP24. Some of you might remember it. It was called Sex Matters. Those of you who are from Toronto, it was really only local, but it was live. So it was like, talk about being thrown in the deep end. With pre-tape shows, you can make a mistake and edit it and redo it. Live, you can't. You're out there. And yeah, I mean, I had a hard time. It was a huge risk. It was a huge shift. But eventually really did, like, to talk about like the treasures that were underneath that fear. I certainly now feel that. And I've grown in comfort level, and now I'm able to, for sure, because I meet women still who say to me, oh my God, I could never do what you could do. And I was like, I could never do what I do. So anyone can do what I do. Anyway, it was a huge risk that paid off, all that to say.
Excellent. How do we prioritize our own time around family without feeling guilty? So I think you kind of touched on this a little bit.
Yeah. I think it's just really, this has become a real overused metaphor, but it still is actually quite accurate, that idea of being on an airplane and putting on your mask first. I think when we don't prioritize our own well-being, and when we feel immense amounts of guilt, I was raised Catholic, so I was trained to feel guilty about everything. Constantly. It's like a go-to spot for Italian Catholics, I feel. I think we have to really work actively to say that that's actually not a true statement, that it is important that we give more to our families, and we're less crusty, we're less snappy when we've carved out time for ourselves. So you'll be better. And you have to believe this story, and it is because it's true. So I think it's a reminder constantly to be like, no, I actually have to, whatever the fill in the blank here, make time for my mental health, make time for my friends, exercise, whatever things fuel you. I have to do this because I will be a better parent, I will be a better partner, and so on. I mean, back to the partner thing too. So many people blow up their marriages. And sometimes I think I've heard from women who've left their marriages, and they say like, oh my God, I didn't realize what it meant to just have every other weekend free, or whatever their setup is with childcare. And I always think to myself, I don't say this after a relationship is blown up, but what if during the marriage you took that time to yourself? Would that have saved the marriage?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, what is the best advice you've ever gotten?
Probably early on, I wasn't quite sure about, I knew I had this feeling inside myself and I needed to create something. Wasn't sure about a book. I wasn't sure what it was going to be, but I ran into this author and I said I was taking notes obsessively and I wasn't sure what it was going to amount to. And she said, nothing is ever wasted. And it just sat there. And again, this goes back to this idea of pleasure. Like what she meant was, and what is so profoundly true, is that anywhere your heart sort of leads you, it's adding up to something. You may not know right away what it's adding up to, But if you go where like your curiosity lies and what you want to read about or investigate, eventually it will add up to something. You may not know what it is. It might be just valuable bits of information that will be useful in an interaction with a stranger. It might be valuable things that add up to a very powerful presentation, but nothing is ever wasted. Like you can't think about time you spend on yourself or your curiosity and your heart as useless time. It's valuable. I promise you.
How can you make finding joy or pleasure a daily practice?
I think it's just doing it, like starting in the morning or at the end of the night, like whatever the time frame is that works for you. For me, it's the morning. Like I like to get up and my brain is freshest. So if my thing is, I'm not militant. I hate the word militant. Militant doesn't seem pleasurable. But I do think like a happy habit is nice. So you can give yourself permission to like jump off it. But I like the idea of saying, you know, if you're a morning person, carving out half an hour, if you can do that before everyone else gets up. And maybe it's that you really go and you sip your coffee and you just think. Maybe it's that you journal. Maybe it's you take a walk around the block. Michelle Obama, there was a story about her where she was like, she loved to get out and run. And when the kids were really young, she used to just like watch Barack in his bed sleeping, and she just resent him. So one day she was just like, oh, he's here. I don't have to like deal with the kids and the breakfast and whatever. I'm just going to go out and run. And if they wake up, he's going to have to deal with it. I mean, this is different from if you're a single person. You have to, you know, maybe do different kinds of things, but I think you have to top or tail of the day, carve out a half an hour to do your own thing. Start there.
Like that. Yeah. It's just personally speaking, I'll get people say, well, I can't believe how early you get up. But I'm like, but it's my time. Like it's nobody else's time. And I can work out, or I can read, or, you know, or whatever.
Totally.
And then there's a comment, they want to know about how to handle bumps in the road that lead to happiness and strategies.
That bumps in the road that lead to happiness?
On the way, yes. So it says,
bumps in the road.
The bumps in the road to happiness and strategies.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best advice is that expect that there will be bumps in the road. Expect that sometimes you'll be rerouted. Expect that there's some kind of magic in that sometimes. And again, an anecdote comes to mind, which was, this was a long time ago for me, but I had it, this is a long time ago, I had a part-time job offered to me and I wasn't sure if I wanted to take it. This was early on in my career, and something about it was just like, I should take it. Shoulds are dangerous in life. Oh, I should do's. Oh, if I don't do that, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I felt like I should take it because it was offered to me and I didn't have a job at the time. And then when you have, I was on a bus trip and a woman sat down beside me and she didn't speak to me the whole trip. But then at the end of it, she asked me some questions about myself. And I asked her about her, and it just so happened she was coming from that job. She had just been, she knew that company, and she said it was a hellhole and it was terrible. It was just like a complete stranger. And I was just like, what are the chances of this? It was a real happy accident that I met her. But all this to say, it was an awakening moment of just like, okay, I should trust my instinct and get off that path. And of course, when I closed that door, another door opened up. I write in the book about the power of saying no and carving out boundaries. And maybe this doesn't answer the question of bumps in the road, but but I do think it's still an important thing to make sure that you're, the more we've been taught as women, you should say yes to so many things. And I think sometimes it's really powerful to say no.
Okay. One person wrote, I'm curious to know how you talk to your son about sexual positivity. Oh,
I mean, we started really young, just about like body autonomy and consent, and using it outside of the framework of sexuality, of course, in really age appropriate things. If we would just say things like, you know, even if you're tickling, let's say, if he says stop, we immediately, you know, respect that. And vice versa. I will say, I didn't give you consent to do that. Like, we use that kind of language. I mean, you know, and then also just like sort of, well, the messages I got growing up were all shame-based. I did feel very ashamed of my body and my changing body, particularly during puberty. And so even now when he's getting pleasure out of his body, we'll just, if it's crossing a certain line, we'll just say, hey, you can do that, but you got to do that in your private space. You got to do that in the bathroom, or you got to do that in the bedroom, and you can do it with yourself. By all means, go take your time out, but in a good way, like have a happy time out. So that's sort of the ways in which we have a book. I have a friend who's a very great sex educator, and his name's Silverberg. And I think I do talk about this in the book. If not, I have resources on the website, but he's written 2 amazing books. One's for more of like the birth to 3-4-year-olds, and it's called What Makes a Baby, and it's really gender inclusive, and it represents it's not about heterosexuals at all. It's about just how babies come to being. It's about sperm meets egg. It's very, very benign and very inclusive. And then the second book, which we haven't cracked yet, but I think we will soon, it's called Sex is a Funny Word, and it breaks down every kind of question you'd have. Like I think it's geared towards like 9-year-olds. He's almost there. So, and I'm letting his curiosity guide me as well.
Okay, thank you. I think that's it for what we have today. Great. Just a second. I just need to read this. Okay, so I have a comment. Thank you so much for sharing your life with us and how to work through finding our pleasure. Being a single woman, I find myself struggling to establish boundaries because I don't have children, and therefore I think I can just work extra hours because I don't have anything else to do. I struggle with finding things pleasurable. Unfortunately, by not saying no to work, I'm celebrated, but I feel like I'm missing out on my life. Any advice on how to break this trend in my life?
Oh my gosh, I feel like I know so many people like you. And
I feel like this is all of us are here, even just having children, the same thing. Pandemic, like I find we're all working more.
I think the biggest thing, there is a lot of joy to be had from work. There's no question about it. For many, many people, that provides a huge source of pleasure. The one thing I've realized over the years, particularly if you don't have your own company, is that the job will never love you back in quite the same way. Corporations are notorious for I've seen so many layoffs over the years. And so if you don't carve out some amount of time for your own stuff, at some point in time, and hopefully it's at retirement time, though, you might be left with kind of a feeling of like, I don't know even what I enjoy. So again, I think I would suggest maybe some of the exercises, like to start out with, like, recollect on what was a childhood pleasure that you used to enjoy. Did you love running in the woods? Did you love doing arts and crafts? Did you love knitting with your grandma? Did you love food? Do you like there are so many different sources. Tap into your senses and start, again, letting your curiosity, but you might have to make some space for it. And remember that maybe also to remember your colleagues too, because the parents who are struggling, so this is, I don't know how to say this in a way that isn't loaded, but I know right now I have very diverse people on my team. And so there's new moms, and then there's people who are single. And I think the new moms are struggling with the lack of time. And so when the single person is able to give all their time, sometimes that single person is taken advantage of. But also there can be resentments caused. So I just think make sure you carve out your own time. You'll make it more equitable for the people around you as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much today, Cynthia, for joining us.
Thanks
I have some slides that I'm going to go over with everyone, including how to find Cynthia's book. And the biggest thing is to visit her website, findyourpleasure.com, correct?
Yep.
Which will have all the resources, and just it's been a real pleasure having you.
Thank you, guys. I thank you to Karen in Virginia, and Gary as well, Sherry as well. Thank you to WXN, and yes, please reach out to me. I am going to go because I actually have a meeting that I'm going to go to now. But thank you for taking time out of your day, and stay in touch. Come visit me and send me any other questions that you have that you didn't feel comfortable asking.
Wonderful.
Have a great day, you guys. Bye.
So for everyone who is still here, I'm just going to be going over some slides, including how to find Cynthia's book. So her book is Find Your Pleasure, The Art of Living a More Joyful Life, and it is available on Amazon and through her website. We also have more upcoming book club events. So we have one in October with Stephanie McKendrick in Good Hands. In January, Sarah Richardson will be joining us with her new book collection, Collected, and she'll be going over the color and neutral one. And Amanda Hamilton will be joining us in February. We want to say thank you to our corporate partners. We could not do any of these events without them and their support. And our membership is still on a promotional price for 2021 at just $99 a year for membership. This year we had a CD Summit, so Canadian Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Summit, and during it we featured our annual report card. So that is, the information's downloadable on our website if that's something that you're interested in reading more about. And we also have our Monday Mojo series, which is a series free to our members and for a small nominal fee to non-members. It's a very intimate event. So 2 ambassadors, WXN ambassadors that are top 100 winners will join every Monday, and they discuss different topics. And it's, you know, 25 people or less that join and just have an opportunity to talk directly and just have conversation for an hour every Monday, kind of like a coffee time, but virtual. As well, we're doing our Stand in Raw Courage event series. So our next Stand in Raw Courage event is this Thursday. We have one as well at the end of September, and we'll have one coming up at the end of October. And our top 100, we are doing the top 100 virtual events or virtual awards program again this year. So we will have a 2-day summit and a gala at the end of the 2 days. And that will be on November 24th and 25th. Tickets are now on sale. They went up on sale today. So we'll be sharing through email more details about that. But they will be 3 different prices. So there's summit prices, gala prices, and summit and gala combo. That's the savings. And that's available at member pricing and non-member pricing. And that's everything today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We will be sending out an email with the recording from today's event, as well as a short survey to just so that you can comment on your experience from today. And we look forward to seeing you in future events. Thank you so much.